own food requirements, and it exports a surplus of 20%. You can see the beautiful farms here up in Galilee, but now the farms pretty much go from the northernmost part of Israel to the southernmost part of Israel. Here along the Dead Sea in the desert, you can see the palm grove, the date palm grove, and you drive down along the Dead Sea, and mile after mile after mile after mile, you see such as this and much more. This is perhaps my favorite story of what God is doing in Israel today. I call it fish in the desert, because in Israel what they tried to do was this. They went into the Negev desert and they started drilling. They wanted water, not oil. They went down, they went down, they went down, 3,500 feet. And when they finally hit water, it was brackish water. Too salty for any good purpose. So they capped the wells. But one enterprising Jew up in Galilee who had a fish farm said, you know, maybe we could raise certain kinds of fish with that water because, you know, we need to develop the desert area. And so they assigned him to do that, and he built a fish farm. And you can see the vats there. Well, what had to happen was that they had to change the water. They used this well water that they had dug, and they used that water for the fish ponds, but they had to change the water periodically, and they poured the water out onto the desert floor. And lo and behold, grass started to grow. And then they said, you know, well, we can't let the grass go to waste, so they brought in cows. And they started raising cattle on water that was irrigated, this brackish water. And the amazing thing is it gave off a very, very sweet milk. All these dairy cattle. Then they decided to try other things. And today in the kibbutz down in the Negev desert, one of the great crops they raise are tomatoes. And they call them desert sweets because they are really, really sweet tomatoes grown from this brackish water that is poured out there into the desert from these wells. Here you can see a Holstein farmer, a dairy farmer in the Negev desert. And I'm talking about lots of cattle that are raised there in the dairy herds. And one of the stops that we like to make on our tours when we go down to Eilat, we stop at a kibbutz there that's associated with the picture you saw immediately. They make ice cream. And it is some of the tastiest ice cream I've ever had. And it's so sweet because the sweet milk of the cows and so forth and so on. You get the picture here, but it's quite indescribable. Let's talk about what's next for Israel, and I'll try to go through this mindful of the time. You see Benjamin Netanyahu, the present Prime Minister, and others associated around him and previously, and the challenges that they have politically. They're just like us. They've got liberals and conservatives and those that try to stand in each other's ways and so forth. Netanyahu's a very conservative Jew and very warm and friendly to the United States, but it's not very well reciprocated. Last year, President Obama visited the Palestinians, and he told the Prime Minister, when I come back here next year, we can have an agreement that can lead to the Palestine is next independent sovereign state living at peace with Israel. And that's why the Palestinians today are so anxious to get the United Nations to recognize them. And so you see all of this going on today. They're trying to circumvent the peace process, go directly to the United Nations to have them declare the state, but they haven't dealt with a single issue or a single problem that would allow them to live in peace. You can see here the Congress Hall. They call the Knesset. This is where the legislature of Israel meets, 120 members. And they're dealing with all these problems all the time. And what they have now as major threats in Israel: Iran, Syria, Hamas, in Gaza, Hezbollah, and Lebanon, and then the various countries and the terrorist organizations and the United Nations trying to divide Israel and reestablish a land of Palestine, or establish a land of Palestine. The Israelis, just a few months ago, captured weapons that are being sent in to the Gaza Strip and into Lebanon by Iran. Hezbollah is a surrogate of Iran. They're stirring up trouble more than you'll ever understand. Turkey captured weapons coming in on this cargo plane just a few weeks ago from Iran. And they have today, thanks to Iran mostly, but to the Egyptians, and now also to Libya, because you remember all those arms and shoulder-fired missiles, many of them are now showing up in the Gaza Strip, which is a very, very dangerous proposition. 50,000 rockets are aimed at Israel from Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. But the real danger, as I understand Bible prophecy, is the efforts of the European Union and the United States to divide the land. Over the years, we have watched world statesmen, leaders, presidents try to make peace between Israel and her Palestinian Arab neighbors, but it has not so far worked out at all. And then you have those who are out to destroy Israel and have stated so, and I show you these pictures of those that their utmost desire is to see the nation of Israel totally destroyed. The changing face of the Middle East as you see it today, whether it's Egypt, Libya, Syria, all that's going on there, every bit of it is bad news. Because what is happening in Egypt, what is happening in Libya, what is happening in these various countries, they are trading in tyrant governments for hard-line fundamentalist Islamic governments that will perhaps be very, very open to terrorists. And so it is a challenge. The first country that fell, you remember, in this spring offensive was Tunisia. And that country has just gone to hardline fundamentalists. Libya, just this past week, became hardline in terms of their government, their new vote. And this Arab Spring that was supposed to have all these Jeffersonian Democrats out on the street and establishing democracies, all they're establishing today are hardline fundamentalist Islamic states. And all of this, I believe, is in preparation for what is coming. Hillary said it was a joke, but I don't think it is a joke. She at the time said it seriously. Let's get Assad to lease the Golden Heights to Israel for 40 years, which would be like putting a Band-Aid, over a major wound. And you can see how Israel today, the little tiny country of Israel, is being surrounded by these hardline Islamist states. And the only protection up to this point has been the United States in terms of world powers, but above all, it is God. There may be uprisings coming to Jerusalem. They're threatening them now, and what we see in the streets of our country will be mild compared to what is about to take place if these threats are carried out. You saw Gilad Shalit exchanged by Israel one Israeli for 1,027 prisoners, but that is what shall we say, the value of human life and of one Israeli, and they were willing to trade for that. Until the 2009, America was Israel's staunchest ally, but that is changing. The Obama administration seems ready to throw Israel under the bus, and there's great doubt in Israel over what the government of the United States is going to do cooperatively to bring peace. Here you can see President Obama on the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This is in June 2009. And you see his feet up on the desk, and that is an insult. That was done deliberately. Muslims consider it an insult to show the bottoms of your shoes, you know, and he's talking to Netanyahu. And why he ever called for that picture, I do not know. If it was just the normal way that he sits at his desk, but it surely sent a message that I don't think was helpful at all. Mrs. Clinton said 1 year after declaring an attack on Israel, it would be regarded as an attack on the United States. That's what she said when she was running for president, but she became Secretary of State and said that was not the policy of the Obama administration. Jimmy Carter has tried to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians for years. In 2009, he was over there trying to make peace. He was in Gaza. They tried to kill him twice in one day. These things just don't work. I'm going to just pass quickly through this because of the time. But there are plans today to divide Jerusalem. East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount are to be given to the Muslims. Proposals at the United Nations that are there now, calling for a Palestinian state, want Israel to go back to its 1967 borders, which are indefensible. And of course, in the meantime, the Iranians are creating disturbance that surely could bring on World War III. This quote came from General James Jones when he said that had God appeared in front of President Obama in 2009 and said if he could do one thing on the face of the planet, one thing only, to make a better world, a better place, give people more hope and opportunity for the future, I would venture it would be something to do with finding a two-state solution to the Middle East. Well, I wish the General would read the scriptures, because that just doesn't work that way. Israel is the only member of the United Nations today that's denied the right to sit on the Security Council. And here's what God says about it, and I'm closing with this now. He said, I'm going to gather all nations, and I'm going to enter into judgment with them on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel. They have scattered my people among the nations, and they have divided my land. And so at the close, when God brings judgment down upon the nations of the world described in the book of Revelation, it is because they have divided the land of Israel. Determined to save Israel, God says, do not fear nor be dismayed, O Israel. I'm going to save you from afar, and your descendants from the land of their captivity. Jacob will return and be undisturbed, no one making him tremble, for I am with you. I will make a full end of all the nations. And I'll tell you, whether you're an individual Christian or talking about nations, when God is the Lord, your Lord, it makes all the difference in the world. I love this promise of God, no weapon that is formed against you will prosper, and every tongue that accuses you in judgment will condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me, declares the Lord. And finally, you shall be my witnesses, the Bible tells us tonight, to the Jews first and also to the Greeks. Jews are coming tonight to Jesus Christ in unprecedented numbers.